still eat bread, pasta, and rice and reverse prediabetes? Yes, you can. But the answer is getting buried beneath a growing list of food rules. Freeze your bread, cook your rice, refrigerate it overnight, and reheat it tomorrow. Do the same thing with pasta and potatoes so that they can create more resistant starch and cause a smaller blood sugar spike. So there is real science behind resistant starch. But if you are spending your life trying to manipulate every single glucose rise, I think we're missing a much bigger goal. The goal is not to trick your blood sugar for one meal. Your goal should be to improve the insulin resistance that makes it harder for your body to manage glucose in the first place. And those are two very different things. So in this video, I'm going to explain to you what happens when you cook and cool starch, why blood sugar rise after eating is not automatically a problem, and what matters much more if your goal is actually reversing prediabetes. Then I'm going to show you how bread, pasta, and rice and potatoes can fit into a fiber-rich, nutrient-dense way of eating that actually supports metabolic health without turning your kitchen into a chemistry experiment. And stay with me because there's one question I want you to actually ask at every meal that really makes a difference. It's far more useful than asking whether your pasta spent the night in the refrigerator. So I'm Dr. Jenn. I help adults and children reverse metabolic disease with what I like to call joyful medicine. It's evidence-based lifestyle medicine that is joy first, weight inclusive, and honors your culture, your life, and your lived experience. And one of my greatest concerns about the way we talk about prediabetes is that people are receiving more and more rules without understanding what those rules are actually supposed to accomplish. Some people are taught to fear normal foods and normal physiology. They're afraid of fruit. Women come to me all the time telling me that they've been told to not have fruit or potatoes or plantains or rice or many of the other foods that they've grown up with. And now, even when they decide to eat those foods, they're being told that they must prepare them in a very specific way to make them safer. Freeze the bread, cool the rice, refrigerate the potatoes, eat vegetables first, drink vinegar, walk immediately afterwards. Some of these strategies can change the glucose response to a particular meal, but think about what is happening psychologically. The person is no longer eating lunch. They are managing an experiment. They're trying to make every decision perfectly because they've been taught that every visible rise in blood sugar is causing damage. And if they can't follow the rules, they feel as though they've failed. You may feel this yourself. And this is not agency. This is fear disguised as health advice. I want you to understand your body well enough so that you can make thoughtful decisions without believing that one freshly cooked potato is the reason that you have insulin resistance. So let's start with what is true. When you eat starch, your digestive enzymes break much of it down into glucose. That glucose is absorbed into your bloodstream and that becomes available as energy. But not all starch is digested in exactly the same way. So resistant starch is a starch that resists digestion in the small intestine. And so most of it actually reaches the large intestine where bacteria ferment it to produce compounds such as short-chain fatty acids, which are really magic for your body. And so one type of resistant starch can increase when some starchy foods are cooked and then cooled. The starch molecules reorganize into a structure that is harder for digestive enzymes to break down, so then they can actually make it to the small and large intestine. So yes, cooling rice, pasta, or potatoes may increase the amount of resistant starch. And yes, depending on the food, the preparation, the serving size, and the person, it may modestly reduce the glucose response to that meal. And that's really interesting physiology. It's kind of cool, actually. But interesting physiology does not automatically the most important health strategy. So here's where the conversation takes a wrong turn. We take a small effect from one meal and turn it into a lifestyle prescription. We stop asking what dietary pattern supports health, and we begin asking, how can I manipulate this one food so my glucose monitor shows me a smaller curve? A smaller curve can give us information, but it does not tell us the whole story. And so blood sugar is supposed to rise after you eat a carbohydrate. That's a normal response. When you eat bread, fruit, beans, rice, potatoes, or pasta, carbohydrate is digested, glucose enters the bloodstream, and the pancreas releases insulin in response to that glucose in the bloodstream. So that's a normal response. Insulin helps your cells access and store the glucose. I call it like the key that opens the door, right? That gets the glucose into the cell where it can be used as energy. and then blood glucose moves back towards its normal range. So this is normal human physiology. A healthy blood sugar response is not necessarily a perfectly flat line. The presence of a rise does not automatically mean that the food was harmful. What matters is the larger response, right? So how high does glucose rise? How long does it stay elevated? How much insulin is the body producing to manage it? What's happening between meals and overnight? What does the overall pattern look like? And what is happening clinically with your A1C, your blood pressure, your lipids, your sleep, your energy, and your long-term health? So a glucose monitor is showing you one piece of physiology. It does not give you the nutritional value of your food, and it's not telling you some of those other important, giving you that other important information. Imagine that it gave you two meals. So the first is highly processed foods. It's made mostly with a refined fat and protein. So it produces very little rise in blood glucose. The second meal has beans, has grains, has vegetables and fruit, and it produces a visible but temporary increase in glucose. Can we look at only these two curves and conclude that the first meal was better for your health? No. The second meal may contain substantially more fiber, vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, and food for that gut microbiome that's doing the heavy work. It may actually be more satisfying. It may support better bowel function. It may be associated with better long-term cardiovascular and metabolic health. But if our goal is solely to create the flattest possible line to prevent that rise in glucose, we may accidentally be leaving out some of the most important foods that will help our body function normally. Those nourishing foods are important. So the glucose curve does matter, but it cannot be separated from food quality, nutrient density, degree of processing, and the rest of the meal that the person is eating. So this leads to the question I promised at the beginning. Instead of asking whether your bread was frozen, ask, where's the fiber in this meal? That question immediately moves you from manipulating a single food to improving the overall quality of the entire meal. So fiber is one of the clearest differences between a dietary pattern built primarily around whole plant foods and one that's built primarily around animal foods or processed foods. So fiber is really important because it actually slows the digestion and the absorption of food. It adds bulk. It supports satiety. It helps regulate bowel function. It feeds the microbiome that's living in our gut. When gut bacteria ferment certain fibers and resistant starches, they produce short chain fatty acids. These short chain fatty acids interact with the intestinal lining, the immune system, and our metabolism. Fiber rich foods also tend to have so many more nutrients. Beans, for example, contain protein, minerals, and phytonutrients. Vegetables and fruit contain vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and water, in addition to thousands of other bioactive compounds. Intact whole grains contain fiber, micronutrients, and a physical structure that actually takes longer for the body to break down. Nuts and seeds contain fiber, healthy omega-3 fatty acids, and minerals that are really vital for our brain and our heart function. So this is why it is so important to move beyond how we can create more of the resistant starch in this bowl of rice. The question should become, how can we make fiber-rich, nutrient-dense food the foundation of the way that we eat? Resistant starch can be part of the conversation, but it shouldn't replace the whole conversation. You don't need to turn fresh pasta into leftover pasta to create a nourishing meal. I personally love fresh homemade pasta, and I don't like the leftover the next day. Which, but that's fine. You can add white beans and lentils and chickpeas and vegetables and greens and mushrooms and herbs and make a really flavorful tomato sauce. You can make the real meal richer in fiber and nutrients while also making it satisfying and delicious, which is a far more powerful strategy than relying on refrigeration alone. Let's take bread, for example. The question is not simply, does bread raise blood sugar? Of course, bread can raise blood sugar. It contains carbohydrate. The more useful question is, what kind of bread is it? How processed is it? How much fiber does it contain? How satisfying is it? What else am I having with it? How does it fit into my overall pattern? There's a difference between eating slices of highly refined bread by themselves when you're exhausted and ravenous, and eating bread as part of a meal with lentil soup, vegetables, hummus, or beans. There's also a difference between choosing a more intact, fiber-rich bread because you enjoy it instead of forcing yourself to eat a product you dislike because somebody told you it was metabolically perfect. Food quality matters. Your enjoyment and ability to sustain the pattern over time matter too. So the goal is not to find one ideal bread. The goal is to create a pattern in which fiber-rich, nutrient-dense foods are abundant, that they're building the foundation for what you consume. The same is true for pasta. A large bowl of refined pasta with very little else is different from a meal in which pasta is one component, right? So if pasta is in a meal with beans or vegetables and greens and maybe a flavorful sauce, you can use any type of pasta you like. But the key is the enjoyment, right? So if you use traditional pasta and increase the amount of fiber and nutrient density of the dish, pasta with lentils and vegetables, pasta fagioli, pasta with white beans, broccoli, and garlic. The goal is not bland food. The goal, it's not to have a punishment food. The goal is really not replacing every food that you love with a substitute that leaves you disappointed and unsatisfied. The goal is to learn to build flavor, nourishment, and satisfaction into the same meal. Because a meal that you enjoy and repeat is much more useful than a theoretically perfect meal that you abandon after 4 days. The same with rice and potatoes. They can be treated the same way. Rice can be part of a meal with beans and lentils and tofu and vegetable and cabbage and greens and salsa and herbs or other foods that reflect your culture and preferences. Potatoes can be combined with beans and vegetables and greens rather than treated as a forbidden or eaten as the only substantial food on the plate. You can choose intact grains more often. You can experiment with different varieties. So lots of fun, different types of grains from around the world that you can try. You can cool and preheat rice and potatoes and pasta when it's convenient. Maybe you're making a salad of some sort. And or if it's you're preparing, you're meal prepping, then that's wonderful. But don't think that that's the only way that you can eat these foods. So convenience is much different than living by a rigid rule. And I don't want you believing that today's fresh rice is dangerous while yesterday's refrigerated rice is medicinal. The difference is not that absolute. Again, the overall dietary pattern and the foundation of what you're consuming matters much more. So at this point, you might be thinking, if food quality and fiber matter so much, does that mean food alone is the key to reversing insulin resistance? No. Food is foundational, absolutely. It's something we do multiple times over the course of the day, and it absolutely is important in our overall health. But metabolism responds to your entire life. And this is where many nutrition conversations become far too narrow. Movement. So the human body evolved to move. Movement is not optional, an optional intervention that was added later to improve metabolism. It doesn't mean that you have to go to the gym. It's part of normal human function. Our muscles, bones, cardiovascular system, nervous system, metabolism developed in a body that regularly walked, reached, carried, lifted, climbed, and worked. This is why muscle contraction helps move glucose from the bloodstream into muscle cells. And it's why regular activity supports insulin sensitivity. And that is why long periods of sitting and inactivity affect more than the number of calories we burn. So movement is a biological expectation. We were built. We are locomotive creatures. You do not need to move to earn your bread. You do not need to exercise to compensate for a meal. You don't have to perform an exact 10-minute walk after every meal to prove that you ate correctly. Movement can include walking and standing and gardening and dancing and climbing stairs and carrying groceries and playing with children and building strength. The goal is to restore movement to ordinary life in the ways that your body, capacity, and circumstances allow. It's not punishment for food. It's just a normal human need. Another big piece of the puzzle is sleep. Sleep really matters. A body that is chronically sleep deprived does not regulate glucose, appetite, energy, or stress in the same way as a rested body. If your sleep is being disrupted by menopause symptoms, caregiving, stress, work schedules, or possibly sleep apnea, removing bread, unfortunately, does not solve the entire physiologic problem. Stress matters too. Stress hormones help make energy available when the body believes it's responding to a threat. So this is useful in the short term. If you're fighting a bear, it might be important to have glucose available so that your muscles have energy to function. But modern life can keep that system activated repeatedly without enough recovery in between. And this affects chronically can affect our insulin resistance. Stress also affects our capacity to cook, to plan, to move, and to really sleep and care for ourselves and others. So, nervous system regulation, though it's often treated as separate from medicine, is not separate from our metabolic health. It's one of the most important inputs. We cannot reduce a complex human body to a glucose spike from one bowl of pasta. So, reversing prediabetes really means changing the overall conditions that contribute to insulin resistance. It means eating more nutrient dense foods that are fiber rich. It also means reducing the dominance of highly processed foods. But it doesn't mean eating perfectly. It just means creating that foundation that's filling your body with nourishing foods. It also means using your muscles normally, restoring movement to daily life. It means protecting your sleep. It means creating opportunities for recovery and nervous system regulation. It also means understanding how medications, health conditions, and menopause and other factors may affect your physiology, and repeatedly supporting behaviors long enough for the body to respond. So that consistency is so much more important than perfection. So this is much more than just simply managing a glucose spike in a single meal. I have seen people become so overwhelmed by blood sugar advice that they're afraid to eat foods that they've grown up with, foods that come from nature even. They believe that every carbohydrate is worsening their condition, and they follow rules that they don't necessarily understand when the plan becomes impossible. And then when the plan becomes impossible to maintain, they feel like they lack the discipline, or sometimes they felt that shame because it's been projected on them by a provider. But I don't believe that. I believe that a plan that doesn't fit real human life is not automatically a good plan, is automatically not a good plan, I should say. You need enough understanding to understand, to decide what matters most. And you need support that considers your culture, your budget, your time, your family, your preferences, and the reality of your health. And you need room to make these changes without shame because truthfully, we've had these patterns for decades many times. So expecting a change overnight is not fair. By the same token, expecting the human body to change overnight is not fair. So can you eat bread, pasta, and rice and still reverse prediabetes? Yes, you absolutely can. You do not need to automatically eliminate them, and you do not need to freeze or refrigerate every starch before you're allowed to eat it. You can choose more fiber-rich, minimally processed food versions when you enjoy them, and you can place those foods within meals that are abundant in beans and vegetables and fruit and whole grains and nuts and seeds. So creating that foundation of nourishing foods. And you can also focus on satiety and portions without turning math into an equation. And the key is to look at the overall pattern, not focus on one sole spike in blood sugar. You can focus on improving insulin sensitivity across your entire life instead of one perfect meal. So do not spend your life trying to trick your blood sugar. Support your body so that it can handle food more effectively and reverse the insulin resistance underlying. Don't build your health around more rules. Build it around understanding. And when you think about what belongs on your plate, begin with the question, where are the fiber-rich, nutrient-dense foods? That question will take you much further than asking whether your bread was frozen or your rice was refrigerated beforehand. So understanding is only the beginning. Knowing what to do does not automatically make it easy to do it consistently, especially when so much health advice is restrictive, judgmental, and disconnected from real life. This is why I created the Joyful Medicine Collective. It is a community for people who want to improve their metabolic health with an approach that is inclusive, joy first, and grounded in evidence. Inside the community, we talk about food, movement, sleep, stress, and the other foundations of health without shame, punishment, or rigid rules. You will learn how to make changes that fit your life, honor your culture, to help you build confidence in your own decisions. Use the link below to join us. You don't need another list of foods to fear or foods to manipulate. You need understanding, practical support, and a community that helps you move forward. I would love to welcome you inside.